Hi, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the very first edition of the International Property Alliance podcast. I'm really excited to be recording this podcast for you guys. And today I have a really special guest with me to kick off this whole journey of podcasts we're going to be doing. And her name is none other than Mandy St. John Davey, which is a really big actor in the Welsh and the UK and also European property market. Mandy has a long established career in training and development and working with large blue chip companies, law firms and local government. 20 years ago, she saw an opportunity in the property market and is now a successful residential property developer. She has a multi-million portfolio of properties both in Wales and Europe and continues to buy properties to renovate and transform into beautiful homes. Along with being chairman of Women in Property South Wales, Mandy is currently using her skills to help other entrepreneurs to reach their aspirations. And that is actually where I met Mandy the first time. She was speaking at an event that I was co-hosting, and I got so inspired by her story, her genuinity, her honest way of talking about property investing in a space where otherwise we tend to see a lot of people painting a picture that might not be the exact truth, if you guys know what I mean. So that's why I'd love to have Mandy on here to share some honest truth about property and how it goes when you put in the work over a consistent and long amount of time. So I'm not going to be talking for too long. I'd like to invite Mandy into the conversation and lead in the first segment, which is the 3 biggest lessons learned. So Mandy, I'd love for you to join us and share the first biggest lesson that you've learned in your long journey as a successful property investor.
Okay, hi guys. Thanks for inviting me, Mark, into your chat room. Yeah, my first biggest lesson, I would say, is buying in emerging markets. 15 years ago or more, I started investing overseas and was looking particularly then at the areas that were going to come into the EU. Buying in Cyprus not only was a challenge for a woman, but it was a very different market to what I was used to. And my lesson there was that you need an in-depth knowledge of the politics and the economy of any country that you're investing in. And I would say for me, I'd visited the country many times before and at different times of the year and felt sure that it was a country that I wanted to invest in. But what I needed to do, I needed to be aware of at the time, was the actual politics and the backhanding deals that go on when you are investing in any foreign country. It was things like checking the availability of title deeds and were they available for off-plan deals. If they weren't available, how long that was going to take, and at completion, when you were expected to receive them. And that is all backed up by, does the guarantee come from your developer? And what happens if you need to sell or flip it before you actually get your title deeds? The one big lesson that I learned is that if you don't have title deeds, banks in that particular country won't actually loan monies. So really it was looking at the developer's credibility. For me, I bought 2 off-plan apartments and with the proviso of being able to flip at 60% of the development. 60% of the development, the property area had become so built up that there was no way they were going to sell because of the competition. That was for me the biggest lesson of me just, I would say, leaving my brains in the plane and investing somewhere else. I was very lucky. And this was a huge learning curve for me, that I was able to part exchange them at some time later for something else.
Brilliant. So just being really sure of the situations and the regulations and everything else that goes into buying abroad. is one of the
Yeah,
biggest lessons.
absolutely. So, for example, understanding all the fees,
Mm,
as an investor, I obviously understood that, you know, the legals, the taxes, things like the notary fees, land registration. The big thing is currency conversion, as you know, as investors, that could have a huge impact on
mm,
your investment. And simple things like opening bank accounts can often be difficult. You need to be in the country to be able to do that.
mm,
But most importantly is looking at the security of that bank. And for me in Cyprus, the country had problems with banks that were going bust, and those that held loans, they went bust. So, for example, mortgages became haywire. There were special conditions in the mortgages and the loans which banks were referring to, and I would tell any investor to check if you have a special condition in a mortgage or a loan, to actually scrutinise that. And for example, you might think that a country would never need to revert to those special conditions, but basically they can change the conditions of your loan at any time.
mm. Wow, yeah, and that just really drives home the point in terms of doing your due diligence, and perhaps especially so if you're looking to do it abroad.
Yes, absolutely. And a big one that I found, which was a huge lesson for me at the time, is to find your own independent solicitor and
Mm,
not go with one that the developer would recommend.
yeah, that tends often to be the case.
Mm,
Well,
mm.
brilliant. So thank you very much for that first big lesson. I think that if people take that to heart, then they can save a lot of money and time, of course. So would you care to share the second biggest lessons you've learned so far?
Yes, renovations. I think this is probably one area that I'm really well known for in the UK. But for me, very in the early days, it was being realistic about how long it takes to turn a property over. Lots of people have high expectations of how long this will take, and people promise things like you can do it in 4 weeks, 6 weeks. It's not possible to be able to do a renovation in that time.
Mm,
So when I actually started, I was quite slow because I tended to do it myself, in respect that I would have local people and it didn't seem to matter. I'd renovate the property, and then I would put it into my portfolio. Sometimes I would flip, but mainly put it into my portfolio. One big thing that I learned was that was the wrong way of doing it. That you do need to be able to have somebody who can turn the properties over quickly, but to be realistic about the time that will take. And if you are flipping, then you need to be aware that it just simply doesn't go in the first week or 2 weeks, that it can take longer, and to prepare for that.
mm,
I remember a property that I bought, and I put a lot of cash in. And I bought it for cash. There was no kitchen or bathroom, and this is back in the UK. And it needed, or it really lended to a double extension. And again, all the works that I was doing was obviously cash at the time. And although the garden was huge, wouldn't be any planning for another dwelling. So I put in a garage. So I spent quite a lot of money on the property. But the property had, and I knew this, had a right of way across the back of the property, which directly went across the garden. Very old terraces, and that was the way that, you know, things were in the neighbourhood at the time. Neighbours could go from one to the other. But it only became a problem for me when I tried to sell this property. I had a promise from the neighbour that they didn't want the right of way and they would actually sell it. We negotiated that price, and as the renovation was going ahead, we put the property on the market for sale. And she decided, once her family got involved, that she wasn't going to sell the right of way.
mm.
Even though I sold the property, which was a fabulous property, within a week, technically it fell over because nobody was interested in the property with the right of way across that back. Not a modern property in today's climate.
Mm,
So
mm,
that's something else to be very wary of, and I'm sure lots of your investors are very savvy today, but it was one that tripped me up, going back to 2005, 2006, when the property market then suddenly started to crash, that I lost, I didn't lose the equity in the property, but, you know, I was very close to losing what I thought I was going to get for the property.
mm. So would I be right if I could sum up the second biggest lesson as having a long-term thinking and not be so short-term and wanting things to be done yesterday?
Yeah, exactly. You know, you need to make sure before you actually go ahead with any renovation property that it's not just a promise. You might get on with the neighbours, especially if you live in this country or whatever, or you might have an understanding that that will happen. But until you actually get it set in legal terms, I would not advise to go ahead with something like that.
Mm. Brilliant, brilliant. Yet another really powerful advice, because that's a common mistake that I see and that I've also shared and partly share still. The eagerness to have things done now, but the knowledge of knowing that it's a marathon, not a sprint, the
Yeah.
classic term.
And they'll
Uh,
come back and bite you on the backside.
exactly,
Yeah, I
yeah,
know. Yeah, yeah.
exactly, and they always
Oh,
do.
yeah, always best to, if it takes another week or a month at the front end, providing, you get all those legals sorted, then I think that's the best way to go with something like that.
Yeah, and this comes from someone with great experience. So, really want to emphasize that point for everybody listening. And would you care to share your third biggest lesson learned?
Yes, I would say for me, it's fully understanding the market that you're investing in and choose a strategy that suits your level of risk. For me, and with my experience at the moment, there's lots of what I say get rich quick schemes out there where you can have so many things going on in the property market. There are so many strategies that sometimes you become paralyzed by the choice and where to start. And I think, I always say it's always a good place to start with a strategy that suits you and start small. When I started with a strategy that was to buy single dwellings, and I didn't get involved with the flats, the HMOs, because simply at that time, 20 years ago, I didn't understand. I didn't get involved with lease options, and today possibly I'm glad that I didn't. So I think basically my learning was that I was able to do something very quickly and start my portfolio very quickly because I learned that particular area and was able to move very quickly on growth. So it didn't slow me down by going off into all the aspects that you need with a HMO. Or say if you are in HMOs that you don't need to know another aspect straight away, is to get into something that you feel comfortable and stick with that.
And I think that is, again, one of the biggest differentiating factors between yourselves and a lot of other investors that I speak with, is that you're very meticulous in being in markets and with projects that you know, and you tend, based on what I've heard from you, you tend to not fluctuate too much between different projects. You like to find what works, perfect the method, and repeat the method.
Yeah, and if it works, I always say, if it, don't, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I work at a lot of money doing what I'm doing. My portfolio is there. Would I go into HMOs? In the area that I particularly choose for my strategy, it doesn't work. So it's no point me going into that area because
Mm,
it's not in my strategy. But it's not spreading yourself too thinly, I think, on the ground. And, we can all look back to 2006, 2007, where lots of investors were so highly geared because they'd gone into all different aspects of the property market that lots of them actually lost everything they had. So it's
mm.
just being good and being the expert in that particular area of strategy that's going to work for you, and therefore that you can build really, really quickly. And especially in the UK at the moment, you need to be an experienced landlord for 2 years before you can get funds. So, think about that.
Yeah, and this also goes very well with the webinar that we hosted yesterday or last night in the International Property Alliance, where we spoke about these demands. But then I do have a following question there based on what you said earlier with international investors.
Yeah.
International investors that invest in the UK that can't be on the ground, and for technically our overseas investors, they may have a harder time, how shall I say, looking for these specific detailed deals, and they're more forced to accepting not whatever comes their way, but since the deals in general are a bit more scarce now with current market situation, how would you say that they can still be detailed and not feel like they're passing up on every opportunity that's sent their way just because they're too detailed, if you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it is getting harder, Mark, to find those deals. And they are, there's a lot of investors coming into the UK. And if you look at the tabloids like the Telegraph or the Times in the UK, the government is clamping down. There's been some kind of documentation in the press, which I will share on my website or on my Facebook page, but they are clamping down on overseas investors in the UK. So that's something to be mindful in the future. And not scaremongering, but just keep reading ahead of what the government is looking at. It indicated mainly on flats and large developments in London, but whether that will be replicated in other cities in the UK. I would say to look at a particular area that you want to invest in and stick with that. I mean, by buzzing all over the UK, you'll find that number one, will your build and renovation teams, if it's flips that you want to do, which I assume most of your investors want to do, are they going to be able to find builders and all the teams in that area, and then move off to another one and do the same thing again, which slows them down? So by looking at and pinpointing an area that they really do want to invest in, they can actually grow their builders and their teams that they need to do renovations much quicker.
Absolutely, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So the third lesson is pretty much understand your market, build experience with a team that you can trust, and repeat the process. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, that absolute trust with your team. If you're not here, that actually will save you thousands.
Yes, thousands of pounds and many hours of nights of sleep.
Heartache. Yes,
Absolutely.
because maybe I'm talking to investors all around the world, and I have that experience because I live in the UK and I've invested in other countries, and I would have had that experience exactly like you're having it.
Yeah, and I can also talk from experience of that is the case for many and for myself as well. So really appreciative and good advice there. And I think that what I would like to sort of round up the podcast with would be the natural question based on what we just spoke about in terms of potential coming regulations, and that is your take on the Brexit situation and the implications it might have, and the benefits and the good and the bad, so to say.
Oh, multi-million-dollar question.
Another 30-minute conversation.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Just briefly, if possible.
It's happened. You have to be positive about it. I think at the end of the day, they are working through it. I don't really know. I haven't got a magic wand like anybody else. I don't really know what's going to happen. I don't think that it will have a huge impact with the property market at the end of the day. We will just have to wait and see.
Yes, we will. And that's the most honest answer one can give, because people that claim to know much more, it might not be entirely true, because there's a lot of people higher up that don't know. So I think that's a good answer.
They don't know. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, great, Mandy. I mean, I really want to extend my gratitude, and that's on behalf of the members of the Facebook group as well for joining us. I'd just like to ask you, where can people find you if they would like to see more information or videos or whatever you might have?
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Mark, for asking me. People can link up with me on my website, and that's www.mandystjohndavey.com. My email is info@mandystjohndavey.com, and you'll find me by searching Mandy St John Davey on my YouTube videos, or you can find me on any of the Google channels for just simply mandystjohndavey.com.
Brilliant. And I hope that we can also perhaps see you on a webinar in the International Property Alliance in the future. I believe a lot of guests would be very grateful for that. So with that, thank you very much, Mandy, for your time, and thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode in just a bit.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Bye.
Goodbye.